Even though I wrote these blogs a while ago, rereading them has been helpful even for me. One thing I've developed in this particular blog was the understanding that if you're suffering, you can't concentrate. But I think more so, when you're stressed out, when you're tired, when you're angry, when you're sad and depressed, when you're addicted, when you're even in physical pain, you can't focus on the values you have, your ideals, your belief system. There comes a certain point where things get scrambled and you're just in what they call fight or flight, or a better way is to say self-preservation mode. And you're trying just to get through the day and preserve and just get through, and you lose sight of the most important things. The things that are the most valuable to you, your family, your friends, your own health, your education. Maybe I'll have to update this one. So this is called If You're Suffering, You Cannot Concentrate. I began the first weeks of school with two phrases in the back of my mind. Happy people love, unhappy people meddle, judge, or are mean, which I did a blog on. And the second one is if you are suffering, worried, dwelling, afraid, even addicted or in physical pain, you cannot concentrate. I know the second phrase seems like common sense, but it seems truer to me the more experience I have with my own life as well as the lives of my students. Students who are emotionally suffering cannot learn well. How can they? Here's a quote here with a little lotus from the Huntington Library. Listening to and understanding our inner sufferings will resolve most of the problems we encounter. As we began our teacher meetings for 3 days before students got to school at the beginning of the school year, I felt overwhelmed by the new direction our educational system was heading, having adopted something called Common Core Standards, so you could see how old this is. We've been told we'll be transitioning to this new way of teaching and testing in the next 2 years, and it will be a pretty big adjustment for teachers and students alike. That first day sitting there worried and a little bit irate or irritated, I began to think of one thing schools do not address adequately in our curriculum that we will need for the rest of our lives. Learning to manage stress and our emotions in critical times. I feel strongly that were we to teach kids how to become aware of and at least communicate, even if only to themselves, to even just notice their feelings, it would be a lot easier for them to learn or to navigate through the other things that are important in their lives. I've changed in the past few years as a teacher. I've changed every year. My students have taught me many valuable lessons. One of the most important may have been that when a student acts out of the ordinary, talks back, acts rudely, checks out, or behaves badly in general, there's usually some deeper problem that they're suffering with. Rather than yelling at a student or getting into a struggle for power in front of the class, I tend to try to let things go and speak to them privately outside. I might wait until class is over, the following day, or until a student seems willing to listen. Sometimes I'll talk to them immediately outside. I tend to ask my students, what's going on? What's bothering you? I cannot tell you the many different stories students have told me, from seemingly simple, just having a bad day or having had a prior argument with someone, to extremely complex, heart-wrenching circumstances, a sick or dying loved one, a parent losing a job, a parent incarcerated or in jail, or thousands of miles away in another country. Insecurities they have, depression, feelings of worthlessness and anger. Occasionally I might try to give advice, but I've found that the most important thing I could do is listen, which I don't do enough. Young adults sometimes need an adult who will listen to them, validate their feelings, and give them a bit of perspective. Not change things, just listen and give them a little bit of perspective. But most importantly, I found that they appreciate someone who cares. And thankfully, there are many teachers who care. The first day of school went pretty smoothly. Although our classes are large and overcrowded, I had 3 periods with over 44 students and one with 44. With over 40 and one with 44. My students seemed very respectful and relatively quiet. There was one exception, and I'll call him Jay. Honestly, I don't even remember who the student's name is. I've been told to watch out the first few days of school for troublemakers or kids who may act out so I can address it with them in college when we were learning to be teachers, or to call their parents and hopefully stop it before it gets worse. After placing my students in assigned seats and talking a bit about geometry and what we would be doing this year, I was interrupted a few times by the student Jay. He was turned around in his seat already, talking to the girl behind him at times. While I didn't want to label him a bad kid in my mind, he was talkative, rude, and definitely could not focus. He was making my day more difficult. That evening, when a friend asked how my new classes were, I said they were great except for one. I had a feeling Jay would be trouble and planned to talk to him outside and perhaps move his seat on day 2. On the following day, in the middle of my first class, Jay came to the door with a transfer slip. I took it from him and scanned it, trying to figure out why he was leaving. He was transferring out of a sport, and they were rearranging his schedule around. "What happened? You're getting out of your sport?" I said, surprised. He said, "Well, practice runs late. I need to get home around 4:30 to take care of my grandfather." "Oh, that's a shame. Is he okay? Did something happen?" "Well, he had a few strokes and now he's bedridden. He can't walk. So I need to go watch him when my father goes to work." "Man, I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I know my father has Parkinson's and he can barely walk. It's really hard on my mom. He has to wear diapers. He could barely move around like he used to." "Yeah, it's weird is that now that this happened, I'm learning all these other things people are dealing with in a similar situation. It's sad how many people are taking care of sick family members." "Yeah," was all I could say. "Well, if you ever need anything, come and see me. I'll still be doing tutoring on Wednesdays if you ever want to come." And he left. While I can't say this was the cause of his being distracted, it does seem to explain a lot. It further verifies my idea or theory, I guess that's not really my own, that it's usually something bigger or more pressing on a student's mind when they're acting out, unhappy, or unable to concentrate. I know for one I cannot concentrate when I'm dealing with and dwelling on matters of the heart. Matters often seem much more important than whatever a teacher is saying in class. Here's another quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. "Compassionate listening is to help the other side suffer less. If we realize that other people are the same as we are no longer angry at them." So as a teacher who often has 12th graders, I'm fortunate to read their personal statements each year. I'm floored every single year by the stories that some of our students have. Many grow up with hardships, abuse, violence, sick loved ones. Some are fighting their own illnesses. As someone who cares, it's difficult not to get sucked into their lives. The more I learn about my students, the more I'm saddened by many of their circumstances. How the more I learn about them, the more floored I am by how strong, resilient, and how amazing they are, and that they still manage to do well in school, to graduate, some to go to college and pursue a career. In fact, many times over, I've wondered if I would have been able to make it if I were in their shoes. I think both students and adults need to stop and think about this idea. How can I concentrate if I'm suffering? How do I do my best? How am I able to be my best if I'm sick, tired, worried, afraid, or hurting emotionally? Sometimes giving students a moment to express themselves, either to another person or on paper, is enough to manage a little bit of this stress, to put it to the side and learn and focus in class. Sometimes adults, I think, forget that we need to do the same, and sometimes this means being still and being quiet and listening to that inner voice that we try so desperately to drown out because we're tired of hearing what it has to say. But until we begin addressing what is really causing us to suffer, or until we begin to give students tools to manage our emotions, how can we expect them to fully be present and learn? And since having written this, all these other things have come across in the world, like COVID, like a war in Ukraine. And it makes me remember that it's also the adults that really we're talking to here. We're all little students in some way or another. We're students of life. How can we focus on our kids when we're so busy trying to pay our bills, trying to manage our health, our family, and we feel overwhelmed? There's another video I said something to the effect of, why are our kids failing? Why aren't they focusing on things that matter, like in school? Why aren't they focusing on school, things that will make their lives better? And those kids could say the same thing. Why are the adults not focusing on things that are more important, things that are more valuable? Why aren't they focusing on their kids, on their families? Why is it always about work and stress and bills and other things? They said that a tactic that the government might use is divide and conquer. Keep people arguing. And then you could do what you want because they're too busy arguing to pay attention. And I think there's another similar type of problem that happens. It's called oppress and depress. And I think society in many ways is built where we have bad communities, people who need much more help, people who don't have the basic needs, people who are working hard, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, and they can't get by. And they're trying to juggle this stress, their own emotions, their own relationships, their family, their kids, and all these different things that someone on their best day probably couldn't worry about all at the same time and still get it right. And so sometimes when we are suffering and we're oppressed or depressed or addicted or even in physical pain, we really can't focus on our priorities. The priorities we have in a good moment, the values and even religion or belief system we have. It sort of goes out of the window when you're overwhelmed, suffering, addicted, emotionally dragged down by hate, anger, depression, or in physical pain as well. So in any case, it's an important thing to consider. How do we concentrate if we're suffering? It's nearly impossible. And I think the more I think about it, it's not just the kids who have this problem. And I think society as a whole, we're suffering and we're oppressed and we're depressed and we're overwhelmed and need to be very careful because in these moments we don't see what our priorities really should be. Even though we've repeated those priorities in our lives and in our minds over and over and over, we forget when we're overwhelmed, when we're suffering, we can't concentrate on what matters most. And I think one of the first things, other than getting help and reaching out to others, is learning to be still and to notice and to pay attention before you try to change it. You don't always have to change things, but sometimes just noticing it can provide, actually in and of itself, some change. But it provides the perspective you need in order to begin to heal and to change it and to relook at your priorities and what matters in life.